How many people in the world die from cancer? Every sixth death in the world is due to cancer, making it the second leading cause of death, second only to cardiovascular diseases. In 2016, 8.9 million people are estimated to have died from the various forms of cancer. 9 million people. I often see the statistic that it's of the 50 or so million deaths that occur each year, it's around that number. About 9 million now are dying of cancer-related illnesses. I mean, that's about a fifth of all deaths, really. Well, and that's what they say here. Every sixth death in the world is due to cancer. Now, when you look at the statistics that they put here as far as the types of cancer, it's not very difficult to see why certain ones are more prevalent than other ones. I mean, the number one is tracheal, bronchus, and lung cancer. Well, yeah, look at the environment that we are all subjected to. All of the toxic pesticides, which we're going to get to. All of the toxic petrochemical products. All of the toxic makeup and body care products, deodorants, perfumes, inhaling all of that toxic perfume into your lungs, you know. I mean, the list goes on and on. We are surrounded by toxins. So, of course, the tracheal, bronchus, and lung cancer is the most prevalent type of cancer diagnosed today. It makes total sense. Then, of course, there's all of the exhaust from the cars of people stuck in traffic, people driving old cars that are inhaling all those fumes, people in factories that are, you know, inhaling all sorts of environmental toxins depending on what type of factory it is. I mean, the list is endless. And then on top of that, you have all of the smokers who are smoking these mass-produced cigarettes with thousands of chemicals added into it, which of course is a big part of it as well. But it's not the tobacco itself that's the problem. It's those mass-produced cigarettes, which brings you to the next one on the list, which is stomach cancer, and then below that, colon and rectum cancer. So of course, this is from all of the toxic food sprayed with pesticides that are poisonous, that is giving people stomach cancer, and then colon and rectum cancer when that food is digested on the way out. And then what is next? Liver cancer. I wonder what that could be from. Alcohol, maybe? You know, and then on and on and on and on and on down the list. They get smaller and more rare, but, you know, it's not hard to see why the explosion, why the ones that are close to 1 million every year are what they are, given the environment that we live in. And just on that note, before going any further, I just want to say that, you know, I'm sure every one of us has dealt with cancer in our lives in some way, shape, or form. You know, either you had a family member who died of cancer or you had a friend who died of cancer. You know, most of the people listening to this will have been affected by it like I have been. You know, and no life is more important than another in that respect as far as dying from this disease, quote unquote. But, you know, what really should just appall each and every one of us is the fact that there are so many children all over the world being subjected to this torture known as chemotherapy in order to, quote unquote, cure their cancer that was undoubtedly caused not from genes, or, well, maybe genes are like 1% of the cases where it's just a defective gene, but it's from the toxins in the environment, from the food that the children are eating, and on with all the toxins in the environment, where they're contracting tumors or whatever form of cancer it is, and then they're subjected to this torture. I mean, look at this picture. It's unacceptable. And yet you'll see all these pictures of these children who have cancer, you know, with their shaved heads, and they're smiling because they still have that, the wisdom of a child, even though they're going through hell. And I just want to dedicate this video to all the children that are going through this right now. It's just, I can't even imagine the heartbreak of a parent who would have to deal with this. Watch their kid be tortured to death. You know, it's worse enough to imagine your own child dying before you die, but then to actually watch them wither away into nothing as they are poisoned by this quote-unquote treatment is just unconscionable, and it has to end. I'm so sick of all of this bullshit. And I'm trying to stay relatively calm, but I've already gone off the rails. So deep breath. Let's get through all of this now. First, I want to start with nerve agents, pesticides, and cholinesterase inhibition. This is from John Norton, PhD, from some website I've never heard of. You have heard it in the news media. Iraq is believed to possess chemical warfare agents, in particular nerve agents such as the deadly VX and sarin. There is no question that Iraq has used chemical warfare agents in the past. Yeah, okay, this is a brainwashed person speaking. But samples of suspicious material collected by the US military in Iraq have shown to be various pesticides. Are the chemical warfare agents hidden someplace or carried out of Iraq, or were, as the old Iraq regime claimed, the agents destroyed? You know, I wonder if the quote-unquote chemical warfare agents possessed by Iraq were the same ones that were supposedly, you know, that famous fake testimony of the girl who got before Congress and said that they were murdering babies, you know, which was later proven to be a complete fraud and is what helped justify the first Gulf War. Anyway, the technologies and equipment used to manufacture pesticides are similar to those used to manufacture nerve gases. Some pesticides act by inhibiting the enzyme cholinesterase. Some chemical warfare agents, i.e. the nerve gases or agents, also act by inhibiting cholinesterase. Cholinesterase is an enzyme found in both humans, other animals, and insects. The enzyme is important in the functioning of the nervous system. There are differences between human and insect nerve transmission, and a goal in pesticide development is targeting the insect pests while leaving non-targeted species alone. Sarin, for example, was originally developed in Germany as a powerful pesticide for killing aphids. Pesticides on the market today are quite safe when used as directed. Yeah, get out of here with that fucking bullshit. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so the point here is that these nerve gases and chemical warfare agents are very similar in their design to pesticides. And I hope the alarm bells are going off a little bit like, well, if they're so similar, do you think it's a good idea that we're using these pesticides on the food that we all consume? We're going to get to Zyklon B towards the end of the video, but just to start, I wanted to point out that Zyklon B was the trade name of a cyanide-based pesticide invented in Germany in the early 1920s. So again, here we have a pesticide that was later turned into a chemical warfare agent with the addition of other ingredients that was allegedly used to murder people. So again, we have this pesticide that's turned into this chemical warfare agent because they are very chemically similar in what they are doing to the person that is exposed to them. And we'll come back to Zyklon B. The history of cancer chemotherapy. The beginnings of the modern era of cancer chemotherapy can be traced directly to the German introduction of chemical warfare during World War I. Among the chemical agents used, mustard gas was particularly devastating. Although banned by the Geneva Protocol in 1925, the advent of World War II caused concerns over the possible reintroduction of chemical warfare. These concerns led to the discovery of nitrogen mustard, a chemical warfare agent, as an effective treatment for cancer. Let me read that again. These concerns led to the discovery of nitrogen mustard, a chemical warfare agent, as an effective treatment for cancer. Yes, chemotherapy is based on chemical warfare agents. That is the fundamental underpinning of the chemical structure of the chemotherapy drugs. Okay? Because of the similarity between chemical warfare agents and these pesticides, based on what they try to target, right? These agents, these chemical warfare agents, supposedly target the tumors. Like, let's go down here and read it. Using this information, Goodman and Gilman reasoned that this agent could be used to treat lymphoma, since lymphoma is a tumor of lymphoid cells. They first set up an animal model. They established lymphomas in mice and demonstrated they could treat them with mustard agents. Now, again, here's just another insane aspect of all this. Yeah, we're experimenting on millions and millions of these creatures, purposely giving them cancer so we can experiment on them. It's fucking crazy. This whole thing is insane. This planet is nuts. Next, in collaboration with a thoracic surgeon, Gustav Lindskog, they injected a related agent, mustine, the prototype nitrogen mustard anti-cancer chemotherapeutic, into a patient with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They observed a dramatic reduction in the patient's tumor masses. Although this effect lasted only a few weeks, and the patient had to return for another set of treatment, this was the first step to the realization that cancer could be treated by pharmacological agents. What? So because this chemical warfare agent had this mysterious side effect, aside from poisoning people, where it reduced a tumor, this is now the treatment that we use. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And let's go back to symptoms of cholinesterase inhibition. Mild poisoning, tiredness, weakness, dizziness, nausea, and blurred vision. Symptoms appear usually within 4 to 24 hours of exposure to in the case of pesticides, sooner in the case of toxic nerve agents. Moderate poisoning, headache, sweating, tearing, drooling, vomiting, tunnel vision, and twitching. Severe poisoning, a single large dose or repeated smaller dosages. Abdominal cramps, involuntary urination and or defecation, muscular tremors, staggering gait, pinpoint pupils, hypotension, slow heartbeat, difficulty breathing, possible convulsions, possible coma, and possible death. What does that sound like? Sounds a little bit like chemotherapy's effects now, doesn't it? Because, of course, that's exactly what chemotherapy is doing. It is based in mustard gas, a chemical warfare agent that is a cholinesterase inhibitor that acts the same as other nerve agents and pesticides, and this is being willingly injected into people as a treatment for cancer. Let's put on our history caps and go all the way back to the year 1910 and learn about John D. Rockefeller and the Flexner Report. I'll bet you've never heard of this report, have you? You see, Rockefeller's goal was to dominate the oil, chemical, and pharmaceutical markets. Now, of course, Rockefeller is just a front man for the control structure. He's where the paper trail ends, their family. So pointing your fingers at the Rockefellers is entirely pointless. Yeah, they're doing what they're doing, but the control system goes so much deeper than that. Anyway. So his company, Standard Oil of New Jersey, purchased a controlling interest in a huge German drug chemical company called IG Farben. On a side note, IG Farben was the single largest donor to the election campaign of Adolf Hitler. 1 year before Hitler seized power, IG Farben donated 400,000 marks to Hitler, his Nazi party, and his private army. Accordingly, after Hitler's seizure of power, IG Farben was the single largest profiteer of the German conquest of the world during World War II. IG Auschwitz, a 100% subsidiary of IG Farben, was the largest industrial complex of the world for manufacturing synthetic gasoline and rubber for the conquest of Europe. Auschwitz used the concentration camp prisoners as slave labor in their factory. Even the chemical gas Zyklon B, used for the annihilation of millions of innocent people, allegedly resulted from IG Farben's drawing boards and factories. Let's go back to 1910 and back to our history lesson on the Flexner Report. In order to build his drug cartel, Rockefeller needed to re-educate the medical profession to prescribe more pharmaceutical drugs. So he hired Abraham Flexner to travel the country and assess the success of American medical schools. In reality, there was very little assessing going on by Flexner. The results of his study were predetermined. Eventually, Flexner submitted a report to the Carnegie Foundation entitled Medical Education in the United States and Canada. Not surprisingly, the gist of the report was that it was far too easy to start a medical school and that most medical schools were not teaching sound medicine. In other words, they weren't pushing enough drugs. Flexner reported that it was necessary to install a doorkeeper to determine which medical schools were allowed through the medical door and which ones must remain outside. The report was presented to Congress and they swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. So the American Medical Association became the new doorkeeper and was empowered to determine which medical schools were properly following the standards of conventional medicine and which ones were not. Contrary to popular notion, the American Medical Association is not a governmental entity. It is a private organization which began in 1847, and it is basically the physicians' union. The only difference between the AMA and the Steelworkers Union is that the AMA members wear white collars, while the steelworkers wear blue collars. And much like many labor unions, at the apex of this organization are the mafia bosses. You see, the predetermined purpose of the Flexner Report was to label doctors who didn't prescribe drugs as charlatans and quacks. Medical schools that offered courses in natural therapies and homeopathy were told to either drop these courses from their curriculum or lose their accreditations. Is it any wonder that the total number of accredited medical schools in the USA was cut in half between 1910 and 1944? The end result of the Flexner Report was that all accredited medical schools became heavily oriented towards drugs and drug research. In his book Cancergate, How to Win the Losing Cancer War, Dr. Samuel Epstein demonstrates that over the past century, the ACS, NCI, and AMA have all become corroded with major institutional and personal conflicts of interest with Big Pharma. As candidly admitted by a recent NCI director, the NCI has become a government pharmaceutical company. Dr. Epstein also chronicles how, for monetary reasons, the cancer industry is suppressing mountains of information about environmental causes of cancer rather than making this information available to the public. In his book, The Politics of Cancer Revisited, Dr. Epstein states that the cancer establishment has also failed to provide the public, particularly African American and underprivileged ethnic groups, with their disproportionately higher cancer incident rates, with information on avoidable carcinogenic exposures, thus depriving them of their right to know and effectively preventing them from taking action to protect themselves, a flagrant denial of environmental justice. In the words of Dr. Henry Jones, soon after the medical monopoly was formed, it began to push its agenda of destroying all competition. A well-organized and well-funded nationwide purge of all non-MDs was undertaken. Over the course of the first half of the 20th century, this medical monopoly managed to shut down over 40 medical schools. Their idea was to keep the number of doctors low in order to keep fees up. After World War II, the medical monopoly started rigidly controlling how many of each medical specialty it would allow to be trained. The medical monopoly also managed to outlaw or marginalize over 70 healthcare professions. Protection of the healthcare consumer was, as always, the rationale for this power grab. Whether the object of destruction by the medical monopoly be homeopaths, midwives, chiropractors, or internet prescribers, the purge is conducted in the same manner. No scientific proof or research data is offered to discredit these practitioners. The entire approach is one of character assassination. And I'm sure they will try to character assassinate me for making this video. It's the same tactic over and over again. The modus operandi is used in any criticism of any part of the control system. The chemotherapy drug industry. The National Institutes of Health estimated the overall cost of cancer in 2010 at $263 billion, of which $102.8 billion was for direct medical costs, total of all healthcare expenditures, $20.9 billion for loss of productivity due to illness, and $140 billion for costs of lost productivity due to premature death. A 2007 study said that drugs prescribed by oncologists account for more than 40% of Medicare spending. 40% of Medicare spending. Drugs prescribed by oncologists. That's just insanity. And spending on oral chemotherapy drugs as a proportion of total pharmacy benefits costs more than doubled between 2002 and 2006. A report released in 2016 found total spending worldwide on cancer drugs at $107 billion. I mean, that's an unimaginable amount of money. A disproportionate amount, 45%, is spent in the United States. Half of the spending on cancer drugs is spent in the United States. $50 billion. Zion Market Research put the global anti-cancer market at $113 billion in 2016 and projected a growth rate of 7.4% in the near future. The Journal of the National Cancer Institute estimated in 2011 that the total cost of cancer care in the U.S. will rise to $158 billion in 2020, a 27% increase from 2010. Due only to projected growth and aging of the population. A less conservative scenario put the cost at $173 billion in 2020. Cancer drugs make up about 11.5% of total drug costs. There is a large range in the cost of individual chemotherapy treatment. As drugs differ significantly in their cost and necessary duration of treatment, the cost of 8 weeks of chemotherapy can range from $100,000 to $30,000 or more. While the drugs can be the largest part of the cost, there are other expenses like hospital charges, travel, cosmetic items, or loss of work. A report prepared by the actuarial and consulting firm Milliman using MedStat 2007 data found per patient per month cost for drugs ranged from $4,000 for colon cancer to $1,100 for chronic lymphocytic leukemia, with costs being dependent on the choice of drug therapies, number of lines of therapy, and duration of each round of therapy. Their report said that 22% of all cancer cases reported to insurance companies use chemotherapy drugs, and that patients on chemotherapy are 4 times as expensive to treat as those who are not. That's incredible. And remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about a derivative of a chemical warfare agent, mustard gas, that people are paying these exorbitant amounts of money to be poisoned by. It's crazy. And going back to that whole analysis of what the mustard gas was doing, which you can read on your own in more detail, it was, decreasing the size of the tumor, but only momentarily, and then you had to go back and do it again, and in the meantime, you're experiencing all of these poisonous side effects from being exposed to chemical warfare agents. What is going on? And you see how it was all designed by taking over all of the governmental bodies that supposedly regulate the medical industry. And, you know, they're just completely in bed with all the pharmaceutical companies, and it's just one big money-making scheme. So not only are they intentionally poisoning you, they're making a ton of money off of you in the process. I mean, this is completely intolerable. And this is the revolution that's taking place right now. People are not, the circles that I'm in, we are not standing for this anymore. We don't buy your food. We don't buy any of your poisonous products. We're done with you. It's over. Just come out and admit the truth, say what you've been doing, and we'll move on. But we're going to move on in a world where we're not subjected to all of this toxic bullshit, okay? Sales of cancer drugs in general doubled between 2005 and 2010. The firm Natixis estimates that the industry will grow 8% per year, and IMS Health estimated that they will grow at nearly double the rate of the global pharmaceutical market. The chemotherapy market contains hundreds of competitors, ranging from large brand name marketers to small niche generic producers, making it very competitive. The company with the largest market share is Sanofi Aventis at 33.9% in 2008. It offers a variety of anti-cancer products, including the leading drugs Eloxatin with reported sales of $2 billion in 2008, and Taxotere with reported sales of $3 billion that year. Just $5 billion there for poisoning people. No big deal. Eli Lilly and Company also has a strong presence in the chemotherapy market with Gemzar and Alamata, whatever it's pronounced, who cares? Sharing Plow with the popular products Timodor and... Why are all these drugs so impossible to pronounce? I guess there's a reason that, pharmacia goes back etymology to sorcery, right? There is a trend in the chemotherapy industry towards the creation of expensive new drugs which target rare cancers. A study published in 2009 noted that more than 90% of anti-cancer agents approved by the FDA in the last 4 years cost more than $20,000 for a 12-week course of treatment. Prices for drugs for rare cancers can be very high. Follotin, approved in 2009 for patients with relapsed or refractory peripheral T-cell lymphoma, sells for $30,000 a month. Joshua Schimmer, an analyst at Leerink Swann, estimated that annual sales of the drug will reach $300 million by 2014. Forbes described Roche's Avastin as the poster child for high-priced cancer drugs. Approved in 2004 for the treatment of breast, colon, lung, and brain cancer, it costs up to $55,000 a year and had $4.8 billion in sales as of 2009. With Roche forecasting sales of $8 billion by 2012 or 2013. And this is another thing, these cancer pills that are coming out, this is a new trend that they're pivoting towards because they know that the truth of chemotherapy is getting out there to a wider and wider audience. So they're pivoting to these cancer pills that you can just, pop some pills like you pop aspirin, which again, aspirin was created by Monsanto. That's a whole nother thing we'll get into. Children's aspirin coming from Monsanto, one of their subsidiaries, but we'll get to that. Or maybe it was Bayer. I can't even remember. It was Bayer. Bayer was the one who did it, but they're one and the same company. Bayer is a subsidiary of IG Farben, okay? And IG Farben and Monsanto are trying to merge into the same company. All of these chemical companies, Dow Chemical, DuPont, they're all the same, okay? They're all run by the same group of people. These three pharmaceutical companies control roughly half of all cancer drug sales. Global cancer drug sales totaled $91 billion in 2013 and are expected to breach $100 billion in sales sooner than you think. They probably already have. Big Pharma turns its focus to cancer. To this end, the good news is that the pharmaceutical companies are listening loud and clear. Oncology drug development is a cornerstone to the success of quite a few pharmaceutical companies, not only because it'll keep them profitable, but because it'll save lives. Yeah, right. We'll get into that. and fund additional research into curing new types of cancers and other diseases. Furthermore, based on data from global data aggregated by PM Live, the top 25 global pharmaceutical companies accounted for 88.9 billion in global oncology sales in 2013. 88.9 billion. But what's really interesting when you dig into the data is that 3 companies comprised about half of all cancer drug sales in 2013. I mean, just look at every one of these corporations, these multinational pharmaceutical corporations, and do not take anything that is produced by any of them or their subsidiaries. Period. Period. We're done with you. So we have Novartis at number 3, 8.6 billion in oncology drug sales. Amgen at number 2, 11.9 billion in oncology drug sales. Roche at number 1, 25.4 billion in total oncology drug sales. And 2 of these are based in Switzerland. Big surprise. According to the research of Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner of Freakonomics fame, oncologists are some of the highest paid doctors. Their average income is increasing faster than any other specialists in the medical field, and more than half their income comes from selling and administering chemotherapy. Yes, you read that right. Oncologists make a huge profit, as much as 2/3 of their income in some cases, from chemotherapy drugs. So the oncologist doctors that are peddling this poison, and some of them know what they're doing and some of them don't. Sure, there's always going to be that bell curve. But they are making all of their, not all of, but the majority of their profits from actually selling the chemotherapy drugs to their patients. So they're just as much in on the racket as the pharmaceutical companies. Their business model is very different from other doctors because you can't buy chemotherapy drugs at your local pharmacy. Oncologists buy these drugs direct at wholesale prices. Then they mark them up and bill the insurance companies. This legal profiting on drugs by doctors is unique to the cancer treatment world. They're making money off the drugs that they insist you take to save your life. That's a huge conflict of interest. Yeah, of course it is. They're selling you the drugs and charging you for the privilege of putting them in your body. No other doctor can do that. And again, the actual chemotherapy itself is a derivative of a chemical warfare agent. We cannot forget that. And we're going to get to how that chemical warfare agent is so similar to the pesticides, which are creating the cancer in the first place. And all of these global multinational corporations, the seed companies, the pesticide developers, the Roundup Ready genetically modified crops, all of that shit is being pumped into people's stomachs, giving them stomach cancer, which is the number 1 on the list, giving them the lung cancers, that's number 1 on the list, and then charging them these insane amounts of money to treat them with more poison that is derived from the very same chemical structure as the pesticide itself. Where am I? This place is nuts. Here's another twist. Some chemotherapy drugs have a higher profit margin than others. If you were a doctor, wouldn't you be tempted to recommend the drugs that put the most money in your pocket? I know I would. And then, he goes on to describe some of the doctors that actually helped him in his battle for cancer, which is very big of him to say, yeah, hey, as far as the trauma aspect of it goes, some of these doctors do, the trauma aspect of it is valuable, as I've said before. But, this whole drug culture is just out of this world insane. And then there's a whole nother subject of the opioid addiction that is all over America and the rest of the world right now, from all these people taking these pharmaceutical, derivatives of like heroin. And then there's all the SSRIs. I mean, don't even get started on how all of the psychiatry and psychology practitioners are pumping people full of all these mental soul-sucking drugs that supposedly will cure them of the depression that is a result of generational exposure to this fucking bullshit system. And then on top of all the money that's being made in all those other places, we have the American Cancer Society and all of these supposed charities. You know, a lot of these charities will, you know, like the ones that will say that they're fighting for the children, right? Find a cure for children's cancer. And they're doing the same, you know, stuff that the American Cancer Society is doing. Do not give your money to any of these charities. Do not give your money to the American Red Cross. The American Red Cross is it's a cash washing business for the black budget. I mean, all these charities are doing the same thing. They're funneling money from the black budget that's involved in the illegal drug trade and washing the cash so that it can be distributed in quote unquote legal ways. Last year, the American Cancer Society reported $919 million in total revenue and net assets of $1.2 billion. So the American Cancer Society, which is supposedly trying to find a cure to cancer, yet promotes all of the official narratives on cancer, is worth $1 billion. And yet, no cure for cancer. Of course not, because to find the cure for cancer, we would have to clean our environment up of all of the toxins that are permeating it, and clean our farms up of all of the toxins that are permeating those, and stop monoculture farming, which necessitates the use of the pesticides in the first place. If it wasn't these monoculture huge farms growing one crop, which is just a sitting duck for a pest to come destroy the whole thing, so of course in that situation you have to develop these pesticides that will target the pest, like the similar derivative of these chemical warfare agents that are in the chemotherapy and other cancer drugs attempt to target the quote-unquote evil cancer cells. But then, you know, I can't even remember the doctor's name, but somebody was doing research on cancer and they found that it was just an infection in a cell that actually causes the cancerous inflammation. Which again, the infection comes from a foreign toxic object getting into the cell. So the whole idea that you need to destroy the cancerous cells is wrong. That's not it, okay? And that gets into a whole nother aspect of the healing part of it, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. And how much did the CEO of the American Cancer Society earn last year? Oh, just $900,000. Yeah. And then they kicked back another $80,000 as president of the ACS Cancer Action Network, the nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy affiliate. Yeah, okay, I bet. Chemotherapy drugs are killing nurses. Now, of course, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the video about symptoms of cholinesterase inhibition and the similarity between pesticides and chemical warfare agents, because these nurses that are handling all of these chemotherapy drugs and administering them are developing cancer themselves because they're handling a toxic chemical warfare agent. And yet, the population has been brainwashed to believe that this will actually cure them of cancer. It is a scam of epic proportions, and it's unacceptable. Why are nurses at risk when handling chemotherapeutic drugs? In the same way that someone can suffer from the effects of secondhand smoke, nurses can also be exposed to secondhand chemotherapy. It takes nothing more than an accidental spill on the skin due to improper handling, a small spray that happens upon puncturing the drug container, or an inhalation of fumes in order to experience these effects. And again, this is the same thing that's happening with all the other toxins from the petrochemical plastics and everything else that we're subjected to. That's all that needs to happen. Or, hey, how about this? How about the toxic water that you're bathing in that's filled with chemicals? How about that? How about you take a hot shower and let that steam, breathe it in, suck it into your pores? You know, they've done studies on people who take showers, they weigh, or baths for a long period of time, they weigh 3 pounds more than they did when they got out, than before they got in the bath, because they absorbed that much water. This is how powerful these drugs can be, and it is also the reason why they can be so effective at treating the cancers that they target. Give me a break. And this is just what I was talking about. The reason these drugs are so toxic is because they target normal human cells in addition to cancer cells. Depending on the drug and its toxicity, there can be immediate acute effects that include nausea and irritation on the area of exposure. So you see that sentence right there is a complete fabrication. No, the reason they're so toxic is because it's a chemical warfare agent. That's no different than sarin or VX gas or whatever. Agent Orange, which we'll get to. So yeah, it's targeting all the cells because it's poison. Oh man. And this just goes to the same thing. Obvious signs that chemotherapy is highly toxic. Think about it here. Let's use some common sense. A person's hair falls out. Their immune system is destroyed. They are constantly nauseous and often vomit. And again, these are the same exact symptoms of cholinesterase inhibition listed right here. Mild, moderate, and severe, depending on how sensitive you are to the chemotherapy drugs. Frequent dizziness is also the norm, as are severe headaches. Are these signs that maybe, just maybe, chemotherapy is poison and doesn't belong in the human body? I'm not a doctor, but I think this is a very, very strange way to heal someone, quote unquote. Yet drugs like tamoxifen are routinely used to treat breast cancer, even though the World Health Organization declared tamoxifen to be a known carcinogen in 1996. I mean, it's not funny. It's crazy. The level of quackery in the cancer industry is amazing. I mean, it is. It is just crazy. And then you have people like Gerson and Dr. Brzezinski and other doctors who are straight up run out of the country for any sort of alternative treatment ideas they might have about treating cancer, right? Oh, no, you're out of the country. We'll take our police squad enforcers, the FDA and the FBI, and we'll raid your offices and arrest you. And, you know, it's the same modus operandi all throughout the 1900s. They did the same thing to everyone that was even close to finding a beneficial treatment plan for people. No, we can't have any of that. Nope. Can't get in on our racket here. Nope. I mean, hey, if people understood nutrition on a fundamental level, we might not even need doctors at all, other than having trauma hospitals for people that suffer accidents. What a world that would be. What if we all started visioning something like that? You probably think that the Food and Drug Administration is not only doing its best to find cures for cancer, but are shutting down quote-unquote quacks who are pretending to cure cancer but in fact do not know how to cure cancer. You probably think that the media is constantly looking for who has the best cure rates for cancer so the media's investigative journalists can keep the general public apprised of who has the most effective cancer treatments and so on. Are your assumptions correct? Of course not. And this is how they manipulate the statistics of cure rates for cancer. First, what is the overall 5-year cure rate of the oncology profession according to their own statistics? And here we go. According to Dr. Jonathan Stegall, the answer to the first question is this. A 2004 study in the journal Clinical Oncology evaluated the contribution of chemotherapy to 5-year survival rates among adult cancer patients. In other words, the goal of the study was to look at how significant chemotherapy's role was in successful treatment outcomes. In order to arrive at a meaningful conclusion, data from many previous studies was pulled and analyzed. The 22 most common cancer types were included in the study. The results were surprising. The overall contribution of chemotherapy to 5-year survival in American adults was 2%. This means that approximately 98% of the credit for survival was attributed to all other treatments, such as surgery, radiation, nutrition, etc. Wow. So, and then on top of all that, the chemotherapy survival rate past 5 years was 2% compared to all the other ones. It is important to note that this study is often misquoted. You have probably heard this statistic quoted in a way which suggests that those receiving chemotherapy only have a 2% 5-year survival rate. In reality, the average 5-year survival rate for cancer is 69%. But again, hold on. This includes all stages of cancer and makes no distinction between who received which treatments. However, given the most commonly used treatments in oncology today, it is safe to assume that many of these surviving patients received chemotherapy. At this point, it is important to discuss what 5-year survival means. In the oncology world, 5-year survival measures the percentage of patients who are still alive 5 years from the date of diagnosis. And again, there's this whole thing of, as the oncology industry has grown and as they've saturated collective awareness with fear about cancer. Oh my gosh, fear, 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 fear. Oh, you might have this gene that Angelina Jolie had. Well, chop your breasts off. You don't even want to chance it. Just chop them off. So as they've done that, it's led to earlier and earlier diagnosis of quote unquote cancer. And we can get into maybe later about how cancer is just a reaction in your body to poisons. You see, what is a tumor? A tumor is your body putting a poison outside of everything else, isolating it. So sure, yeah, you could go in with surgery and remove the tumor, but you're not dealing with the underlying problem of the toxins that created it in the first place, you see. The only way to actually remove the tumor entirely and never have it return would be to cure the underlying symptom of the toxins that produce that in the first place. And of course, it does go deeper than toxins because your mind can create the conditions for yourself. The mind is incredibly powerful, and the placebo effect proves that. So the combination of all these things working together is why cancer is continually skyrocketing in this, toxic soup that we're all immersed in. And then that doesn't even bring up the toxic electronic signals that we're all exposed to, right? The cell phones and all of the Wi-Fi and just look at Raymond Rife's experiments with frequency, and it's not hard to imagine how frequencies that aren't designed to resonate with the Earth's ionospheric Schumann resonance frequency might produce adverse results in the body. Imagine that. So anyway, I'm not going to read any more of this, but, well, maybe I will. But just, you have to keep in mind that the 5-year survival rate is how they measure cancer survival rates. So it doesn't matter if a patient died 5 years and 1 day after their initial diagnosis. If they were treated with any sort of cancer drugs from the pharmaceutical industry, that's counted as a successful treatment. You see, it's crazy. So if you get chemotherapy, you get poisoned with this chemical warfare agent, a derivative of mustard gas, and then if you die from that poisoning 7 years after your initial diagnosis, you're counted as a cure. This is just an anecdote about a natural cancer researcher who was kicked out of the country and destroyed like many others before him. Dr. William Kelly, a dentist turned natural medicine cancer researcher. He worked with more than 30,000 cancer patients using his protocol. He had a cure rate of 93% on newly diagnosed cancer patients who had not had chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery. Dr. Kelly was thrown in jail and later went to Mexico to treat cancer patients. Why did he go to jail? Because he used products to treat cancer which cannot be patented. Thus, the pharmaceutical industry and medical community had no interest in his treatments because they cannot make huge profits from treatments that cannot be patented. And of course, why do you think urine therapy is so frowned upon and made fun of and just ludicrous? Well, because it's free and every single person on the planet has their own natural pharmacy within their own body. No one can make any money off of that, can they? So they had him thrown in jail. They did not care that he had a 93% cure rate. His treatments were not profitable enough to satisfy their greed. Dr. Kelly used cancer treatments designed by nature, such as natural enzymes. These enzymes made the cancer cells visible to the immune system, and the immune system cured cancer. The enzymes were natural and could not be patented. In other words, Dr. Kelly was not a medical doctor, and he used natural medicine to achieve his 93% cure rate. Using nature is an unforgivable sin, according to the AMA and the media. His cure rate was irrelevant. Oh, and here we go. Here's some more of the doctors. I just mentioned Royal Rife. 100% cure rate using electromedicine to kill microbes inside the cancer cells. The American Medical Association tried to buy him out. Rife refused, so the FDA shut him down and destroyed his lab and inventory. They did the same thing to Wilhelm Reich, and it just goes on and on. Dr. Philip Binzel had an 81% cure rate using liquid latriol from apricot seeds. He got it from Mexico, and the FDA tried to block the import into the United States. Oh, man. So you see, there's something really special going on in the United States, and I don't know what it is in particular. It's probably because of our position as being purposely turned into a world superpower, we have a lot of resources and freedoms that other places simply do not have. So we have to be the most mind controlled and we have to be the most poisoned on the planet. Otherwise, we could take those resources and those freedoms and we could use them to create something pretty special that the rest of the world could mimic. And I'm not even talking about using the government or any of that bullshit. I'm just talking about individually we could create things that could be replicated across the planet and we would have the freedoms that are, relatively broader than other places to have that not be infringed upon. I say that as I'm just reading about people getting shut down by their police force. So of course that would end up happening if you tried to organize something. So I'm just talking about individually here. But moving on, this is just more on cancer statistics. Detailing how if you view the raw vital statistics from 1967 to 1992, there is nothing to indicate that there should be any downturn between 1992 and the present. And what he shows is that mortality from cancer in the U.S. is steadily increasing every year, despite what they say as they manipulate the statistics with the 5-year survival rate guideline. If you just go by total death rate, it's increasing year after year after year. And it's only going to continue to increase as the baby boomers age and all of the toxins that they accumulated invariably produce a wide variety of diseases, which of course the medical industry will be ready to sell them all sorts of drugs to take all of the money that they've saved their entire life on the way out to the grave. That's the place that we live in right now. Now let's get to Agent Orange and Monsanto. With the International Monsanto Tribunal beginning this week in The Hague, Mick Grant reports from Vietnam with this special investigation for the ecologists 5 decades after the company's lethal herbicide Agent Orange first devastated the country, and discovers the agribusiness giant is sneaking its way back into Vietnam with modern herbicides and Roundup-ready GMO crops. So let's set the scene here. Much like the cancer industry and chemotherapy industry in particular, which is you are being poisoned by all the other multinational corporations, which of course are controlled by the same group of people. These poisons and toxins create cancer or other diseases within your body, and then they sell you the drugs that will only treat the symptoms of those poisons and toxins and will not cure you. And so they are making money off of you and your suffering. This is the model of the medical industry. And so what does Monsanto do? Well, they are instrumental along with Dow Chemical of creating Agent Orange, which was again, a derivative of a pesticide, 2,4-D, that was used, we'll get into that, a derivative of a pesticide that's turned into a toxic chemical warfare agent that they dropped on the forests and jungles of Vietnam in an attempt, it was a pesticide, an attempt to kill the jungles so the Vietnamese could not hide in the jungles, you see. That's what Agent Orange was designed to do. And all you gotta do is look up pictures of the fucking horror that this pesticide-derived chemical warfare agent wreaked on the population of Vietnam in the form of birth defects after the fact and just general deformities and illness that all of these people were subjected to. And now, on top of that, Monsanto, who developed the Agent Orange, is going back into Vietnam and selling them the same poison. It's unacceptable. Flying into Saigon at night, after an absence of more than a decade, I am struck by the American corporate logos lighting up the landscape, especially those related to food and drink. Golden arches are sprinkled along the boulevards, and Starbucks mermaids flash their twin tails everywhere. A neon Colonel Sanders even takes on Ho Chi Minh portraits, sporting the same wispy white goatee. As Vietnam embraces American culture, the U.S. food gang is back in force. McDonald's, Starbucks, KFC, and Coca-Cola, and Monsanto. Well, Monsanto does not exactly advertise its presence because it's more on the apocalypse now side of things. Actually, when it comes to the food chain, Monsanto is more like the four horsemen of the apocalypse: war, pestilence, famine, and death. As Monsanto rides roughshod over farmers, buys off politicians, and pays off scientists, the four horsemen could easily be symbolic for the four GM crops they control: corn, cotton, soybeans, and canola. But let's rewind a bit to the days when Monsanto Corporation started out as the maker of killer poisons like DDT, PCBs, and Agent Orange. From 1961 to 1971, the U.S. dropped 21 million gallons of defoliants over large swaths of Vietnam, of which 12 million gallons were Agent Orange, a herbicide manufactured for the U.S. Department of Defense primarily by Monsanto Corporation and Dow Chemical. Its name derives from the color of the orange striped barrels in which it was shipped. There were other colors in the rainbow herbicides, but Agent Orange was by far the most widely used. The use of Agent Orange was an experimental form of chemical and biological warfare designed to strip foliage and deny the enemy jungle cover, and to deprive enemy forces of their food supply, directly spraying rice fields, for instance. Experimental in this instance, meaning no idea of the long-term effects of this deadly herbicide, which can release dioxin, one of the most potent toxins known to mankind. And now, 5 decades later, with the cooperation of the US government, Monsanto is knocking on Vietnam's door with another potentially carcinogenic herbicide, Roundup. GMO seeds are considered dangerous not only because they are modified, but also because they are designed to work with the chemical herbicide Roundup, Monsanto's market-leading glyphosate brand. The buildup of glyphosate in crops is suspected as a leading cause of a spike in cases of autism, cancer, and long-term illnesses in America, not to mention a possible link with bee colony die-offs. The use of Roundup is highly controversial, and it has already been banned in a number of countries around the globe, but of course not in America. And before going further, I just want to something about the GMO issue and Roundup Ready glyphosate seeds and the actual Roundup spray itself. Monsanto's Dirty Dozen, the history of Monsanto. What products has Monsanto produced? Well, first we have saccharin, one of the early fake sweeteners that is totally poisonous. And it was designed originally for Coca-Cola when Monsanto first came into being. PCBs. Monsanto began expanding their chemical production into polychlorinated biphenyls to produce coolant fluids for electrical transformers, capacitors, and electric motors. 50 years later, toxicity tests began reporting serious health effects from PCBs. Internal company memos from 1956 surfaced, proving that Monsanto had known about dangers of PCBs from early on. In 2003, Monsanto paid out over $600 million to residents of Anniston, Alabama, who experienced severe health problems including liver disease, neurological disorders, and cancer after being exposed to PCBs. And yet the damage persists. Nearly 30 years after PCBs have been banned from the US, they are still showing up in the blood of pregnant women, as reported in a 2011 study by the University of Cal, San Francisco. Polystyrene. In 1941, Monsanto began focusing on plastics and synthetic polystyrene, which is still widely used in food packaging and ranked 5th in the EPA's 1980s listing of chemicals whose production generates the most total hazardous waste. And this is an extension of what Rockefeller and Standard Oil did when they bought into IG Farben and how they wanted to create a subsidiary of the oil industry in the form of the petrochemical industry, which produces plastic and all of the other containers that we use to put our food in, or they give us our food in, I should say. Atom bomb and nuclear weapons. Between 1943 to 1945, Monsanto was, a division of Monsanto was heavily involved in the Manhattan Project, refining chemicals used as triggers for atomic weapons. DDT. In 1944, Monsanto became one of the first manufacturers of the insecticide DDT to combat malaria-transmitting mosquitoes. Despite decades of Monsanto propaganda insisting that DDT was safe, again, keep in mind GMOs here, there's all sorts of propaganda out there insisting that that is safe. The true effects of DDT's toxicity were at last confirmed through outside research, and in 1972, DDT was banned throughout the US. Dioxin. In 1945, Monsanto began promoting the use of chemical pesticides in agriculture with the manufacture of the herbicide T245T, one of the precursors to Agent Orange, containing dioxin. And again, this is a direct corollary, 1945 post-World War II, a direct corollary to the rise of industrial agriculture in the monocrop fields to feed the increasingly congregated megacity regions that would be coming in the future, because that many people put in one place is totally unnatural, and they have to create a totally unnatural food system to ship to all of these places. Ideally, we are interacting with our local environment, and we all have local farms, and we all eat in season, and we trade with each other. And, you know, it doesn't have to be some Luddite thing now. We do have the internet that we could use to trade with distant places, but it would all be done in a trusted network of people that are not poisoning the products that they're trading. Dioxins are a group of chemically related compounds that since become known as one of the dirty dozen. Persistent environmental pollutants that accumulate in the food chain, mainly in the fatty tissue of animals. In the decades since it was first developed, Monsanto has been accused of covering up or failing to report dioxin contamination in a wide range of its products. And then we have Agent Orange, which we already went over. Internal Monsanto memos show that Monsanto knew of the problems of dioxin contamination of Agent Orange when it sold it to the US government for use in Vietnam. And of course, Monsanto bought Searle, which was headed by Donald Rumsfeld at the time of the acquisition, and then Rumsfeld just moved right into the Bush administration's Department of Defense. So you see the relation between the chemical warfare producers and the military-industrial complex. It's all the same thing, as you all know. I'm not telling you anything new. Think that can happen here. 2 crops were recently genetically engineered to withstand a weed killer made with one of the major components of Agent Orange, 2,4-D, in order to combat superweeds that evolved due to the excessive use of Roundup. How wonderful. Petroleum-based fertilizer, here again, is another derivative of the petrochemical industry. In 1955, Monsanto began manufacturing petroleum-based fertilizer after purchasing a major oil refinery. Petroleum-based fertilizers can kill beneficial soil microorganisms, sterilizing the soil and creating a dependence, like an addiction, to the synthetic replacements. Roundup. During the early 1970s, Monsanto founded their agricultural chemicals division with a focus on herbicides. And you see, it's totally natural for a chemical company developing chemical warfare agents like Agent Orange to move into the pesticide, herbicide industry because, again, as we noted at the beginning, they are chemically very similar. So, is it making sense yet why we should not be using these at all? Hello here, people. Let's go. While glyphosate has been approved by regulatory bodies worldwide and is widely used, shocker, I wonder why the government would do that. Maybe it's because they're all one and the same thing. And then finally, well, I think it was 12 things, but we have aspartame, and I've gone over aspartame in another recording, just complete poison and causing, well, look at this. During the clinical trials conducted on 7 infant monkeys as a part of aspartame's application for FDA approval, 1 monkey died and 5 other monkeys had grand mal seizures. Yet somehow aspartame was still approved by the FDA. Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, we're done with you. And I don't need a gun. I don't need any sort of thing. It's a revolution of the mind and the actions that come after that. We're done with your system. It's over. It's over. Number 11, bovine growth hormone. This genetically modified hormone was developed by Monsanto to be injected into dairy cows to produce more milk. Cows subjected to RBGH suffer excruciating pain due to swollen udders and mastitis, and the pus from a resulting infection enters the milk supply, requiring the use of additional antibiotics. RBGH milk has been linked to breast cancer, colon cancer, and prostate cancer in humans. What a shocker. And then finally, getting to the whole point of this, we have genetically modified crops, GMOs, and like all of these products that were developed before by Monsanto, regardless of what they say right now, it's guaranteed that they know that these things are incredibly toxic because of the glyphosate concentration, this derivative of chemical warfare agents that kill people, okay, is being used to spray on our food supply. So obviously, don't eat any of these products. And moreover, just like in the early days of PCBs, DDT, Agent Orange, and all the rest, do not believe any of the public or regulatory agencies telling you that this is perfectly safe and doesn't have any effect on the larger environment. I mean, for all we know, glyphosate is so widespread on these industrial agricultural operations that it's seeped into the water table and it's raining glyphosate on us. So even if you have an organic farm, you might be getting glyphosate rained on you. It's ludicrous. I mean, look at what Agent Orange did to people. Look at this. Well, that's a drawing. That wasn't real. It's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable. The world's largest seed and pesticide company, Bayer's history is even darker than Monsanto's. During World War II, Bayer was a part of IG Farben, which collaborated with the Nazis to produce chemical weapons such as chlorine gas. Bayer also used scores of death camp inmates as slave labor in its factories. Moving to the current era, Bayer was permitted to trial experimental GM rice at a U.S. university. The experiment got out of control, wreaked havoc on local rice production, and infected 30% of U.S. rice acreage. Bayer had to pay $750 million in damages to American farmers. A merger of Monsanto and Bayer would mean the creation of the world's largest seed and pesticide company, controlling over 30% of the global market for seeds. In 1995, as soon as the U.S. lifted its 2-decade economic embargo on Vietnam, and how ridiculous is that? There's the whole thing about, not only were they spraying it on the Vietnamese people, and they were dealing with all that stuff, but U.S. troops were over there too, and they were getting exposed to the Agent Orange. And now there's all these veterans that have had problems over the decades from exposure to Agent Orange. And of course, the VA just treats them like trash, and they don't get the respect they deserve, even though they were sent over there to die knowingly. I mean, the documents, the Pentagon Papers are out there. They knowingly sent these kids over there to die, knowing that the war could not be won, and they continued it decade after decade after decade. It's just more eugenics, same as it ever was. And then these soldiers get back, just like they get back from the Gulf War with Gulf War syndrome, or they come back with PTSD now from Iraq and Afghanistan, and nobody gives a fuck about them. Oh, sure, every now and again they make a movie like, oh, hey, let's all feel bad for the soldier. All these people out there saying support our troops. No, you should not support the troops. You should, don't promote that meme that these troops should be supported in what they're doing, okay? No troops on any continent in any arbitrarily lined landmass called a country should be supported. War is a racket, as Smedley Butler said. It's insane. Okay? Give me a break. In 1995, as soon as the U.S. lifted its two-decade economic embargo in Vietnam, Monsanto was in there, reaching out to farmers and business partners. The U.S. Embassy arranged for Monsanto's leading scientists to visit Vietnam and convince officials of the benefits of GMOs. Wow! Among the visitors was Paul Tang, a biotech expert from Singapore, who in 2008 was the keynote speaker at a series of conferences hosted by the U.S. Embassy. By huge coincidence, wink wink, Paul Tang was also a senior executive for Monsanto in Asia from 2000 to 2002. It's like fucking Clarence Thomas, who was a Monsanto attorney, and then, oh yeah, now he's on the Supreme Court. Give me a break. The strategy appears to have worked, with a number of government agencies in Vietnam convinced that GMOs are going to be the source of greater economic expansion and the way forward to solve Vietnam's food problems. Some government agencies envisage the growing of GMO crops on 30 to 50% of Vietnam's farmland by 2020, which is not far away. Monsanto's initial target in Vietnam is production of GM corn for animal feed, and of course, all that GM feed is being fed to the factory farms, the torture that's going on there. So not only are you consuming all that torture and supporting that animal holocaust, but if you consume the food, you're also consuming all these GM poisonous chemical warfare pesticides that are in the meat from the actual animal ingesting the GM corn or whatever feed they use that's GMO. Which the corporation claims will alleviate the nation's reliance on imported corn. You know, oh, and by the way, I'm pretty sure the European Union bans all American meat. I'm almost positive they do not allow American meat. And I wonder why. In 2014, 4 corn varieties were approved for trial in Vietnam. The first Monsanto crop of GM corn was harvested in April 2015. Monsanto is now looking to have more varieties approved by the Vietnamese Agriculture Department. This model uses the nefarious system whereby Monsanto owns patented seeds and farmers pay royalties. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's just crazy. Monsanto is pressing for Vietnam to develop GM grain crops to produce protein for the nation's growing middle class. And this is what they always use as the selling point. It's the same reason Bill Gates is down there in Africa saying everybody needs to be vaccinated and they all need to grow these GM crops, right, to solve world hunger and the population crisis. It's just outrageous. It's outrageous stupidity on the part of everyone for falling for this. And I fell for it just as much as everybody else. I'm not judging you, man. Come on now. You know I'm never judging you. And the introduction of glyphosate-tolerant corn variety is already setting off alarm bells due to fears it will set off huge increases in the spraying of Monsanto's Roundup on farms across the country in an uncomfortable echo of the past. Oh my gosh, this is nuts! And then this is Monsanto and Bayer's chemical romance. Heroin, nerve gas, and Agent Orange. Well, yeah, heroin, of course. Why do you think they were in the poppy fields of Afghanistan? You know, you think that's played a role in the opioid epidemic that's going on in America? I wonder. I mean, my God, they're shipping back drugs in dead soldiers' caskets. Oh, and then this is just line number 6, pesticides and herbicides don't cause cancer either. Well, of course they cause cancer because pesticides only work because they interfere with metabolic processes and kill organisms. By definition, they are deadly or they wouldn't be used as pesticides. The world's most popular herbicide, glyphosate, is molecularly very similar to VX nerve gas, the most toxic substance ever created by humankind and developed as a weapon of mass destruction. And there you go, going back to the exact same thing, the similarity between pesticides and all these chemical warfare agents, their chemical similarity, that is, they are very, very much the same thing. Wake up. We should not be using any form of pesticides. At least none of the forms of pesticides developed by these chemical corporations, that's for damn sure. I mean, of course, there are natural, quote-unquote, versions of pesticides out there. like pyganic is a pesticide developed from the flower of a chrysanthemum flower and with other ingredients that is OMRI approved, which is one of the organizations that the USDA National Organic Standards Board approves as organic viable as far as the USDA organic label goes. So that's technically a natural pesticide, but at the same time, you got to question. Well, I won't get into the whole farming. I'm going to save that for another video, the whole farming thing in the USDA organic label. I won't get into that right now. But just know you have to be very careful with the USDA organic label because the corporations, they know this sentiment is out there. I mean, you can watch Shark Tank and listen to that marketer Rohan. I think that's his name. Every time a natural organic product comes on Shark Tank, he's always sitting there like, oh, well, yes, you're very on trend right now. That's what the corporations will do. All these multinational corporations, they'll turn this sentiment into a trend. They'll buy up all the sellouts who'll sell their organic companies to these multinational corporations. And then slowly over time, they'll destroy the organic label. They're already trying to do it. They're going to destroy the organic label, what it used to mean. And then they're going to peddle all these half-ass versions of organic products to unsuspecting consumers who want to do the right thing for their body, and then will be exorbitantly charged. I mean, that's why they called it Whole Paycheck. But then, of course, Amazon just bought Whole Foods. So, I mean, if you shop at Whole Foods still, you're delusional. You got to find other places to go to get organic produce. I understand that people don't have a lot of choices in various circumstances, but again, go to localharvest.org, find a farm in your area that's local, go visit the farm. These farmers will be more than willing to let you tour the place and tell you how they grow it because that's how they create their business now if they're a small farm, okay? Oh yeah, and then there's mainstream articles like this from the biggest tabloid of them all, the Daily Mail. Men with cancer live for 25% longer if given a chemotherapy drug early on in their treatment. Think about the spin of that headline. Oh, you live 25% longer? Well, let's say it's a year. Oh, so you live 3 months longer if you're given a chemotherapy drug early on. And if that 3 months is beyond 5 years, you're counted in the statistics as a cure for chemotherapy. It's just totally crazy. Lie upon lie upon lie. And so the thing I want to end on here is going back to Zyklon B. And let's see, there it is. Again, Zyklon B was the trade name of a cyanide-based pesticide invented in Germany in the early 1920s. Hydrogen cyanide, a poisonous gas that interferes with cellular respiration, was first used as a pesticide in California in the 1880s. So again, we have this chemically similar pesticide being turned into a chemical warfare agent that supposedly murdered what is the total official number? 1 million people, I believe. Yes, in early 1942, Zyklon B emerged as the preferred killing tool of Nazi Germany for use in extermination camps during the Holocaust. Around 1 million people were killed using this method, mostly at Auschwitz. Tesch was executed in 1946 for knowingly selling the product to the SS for use on humans. Hydrogen cyanide is now rarely used as a pesticide, but still has industrial applications. What? Why? Why would it ever have industrial applications? This is just madness. Anyway, Zyklon B. IG Farben was a powerful cartel comprised of Bayer, BASF, Hoechst, and other German chemical companies which experimented mercilessly on Jewish prisoners as Hitler commanded. Inside the World War II Auschwitz concentration camp, testing dangerous drugs and vaccines and killing thousands. Now, from 1950 to 1980, Bayer, BASF, and Hoechst filled their highest position, chairman of the board, with convicted mass murderers. Currently, each of the three IG Farben daughter companies is far more powerful than Farben ever was during World War II. Today, these companies send lobbyists to Washington, D.C. with millions of dollars to influence regulatory decisions made by the FDA. So you have, as a part of Project Paperclip, you have all these scientists coming over from Germany, and IG Farben and its subsidiaries, Fritz Termeer, Bayer Supervisory Board after his conviction, Carl Wurster, BASF helped manufacture Zyklon B gas, Arthur Rudolph went on to design the Saturn V rocket used in the Apollo moon landings. Wow. Kurt Blome, who admitted to killing Jews with gruesome experiments, hired in 1951 by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps to work on chemical warfare. So you can see how this relates to the whole Rockefeller investment in IG Farben and the American Medical Association, and how that all tied in the chemical companies with chemotherapy that we were going over earlier. And the company that made Zyklon B for Nazi Holocaust made RU-486 for abortions. So not only are they in on this Zyklon B thing, oh, hey, they're also making the abortion drugs that are murdering millions and millions of children every year before they're ever born. And in addition, within 3 months after Hitler came to power, the publicity director of the Rockefeller Foundation and personal advisor to John D. Rockefeller, a man named Ivy Ledbetter Lee, was assigned the responsibility of directing public relations for IG Farben. After the war, IG Farben would change its name and become known as Hosts AG. Today, Hosts is a gigantic multinational corporation with subsidiaries all over the world, including the United States. One of Hosts' subsidiaries, Roussel Uclaf, is the French company that developed RU-486. In other words, the same company that produced the gas used in the Nazi death camps, allegedly, also produced the abortion pill that is now being used in American abortion clinics. And in both cases, there was a known connection to the Rockefeller Foundation. I mean, and there you go. The Rockefeller Foundation is highly, highly involved in the American Medical Association. And there's your tie-in between the pesticide industries, the chemical companies, and the medical industry. There it is. But last but not least, Death Train. Will Germany finally pay the Holocaust survivors of IEC? Over the past 65 years, the German government has paid more than $70 billion in reparations to Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. Moreover, Obama administration earmarks $12 million for Holocaust survivors. Now, as we just went over, 1 million people were allegedly murdered in the Nazi concentration camps with Zyklon B gas. Zyklon B gas was a derivative of a pesticide. It was originally used as a pesticide. Now, going back to chemotherapy, what was chemotherapy originally derived from? Well, it was derived from a mustard gas, a chemical warfare agent, which is very similar to the pesticides. What was Agent Orange, the chemical warfare agent, derived from? A pesticide and herbicide. Okay, do you see the connection here? So, if the Obama administration, if our government and other governments of the world are going to award reparations for 6 million people, and specifically 1 million people who were subject illegally to death and other experiments using these chemical warfare agents, well, on behalf of the human race, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that every single person on the planet who has been subjected to cancer or has had a loved one die from cancer or a friend that experienced cancer or in any way, shape, or form has been directly tied to this cancer industry and has paid out money to the medical oncology racket that is charging exorbitant amounts of money for poison to be injected into people and otherwise pills that only treat the symptoms, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that every single person on the planet with such a claim is deserved to be given reparations from the governments of the world, and also all of these companies that make in excess of hundreds of billions of dollars selling all of these drugs. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.